This wasn't a leak. It was a cover-up exposed, a 53-page federal indictment, buried to protect power. We found the blueprint. Watch closely. Everything you were told was wrong. They told us the files were unsealed, a promise of transparency, a moment of reckoning decades in the making. But they didn't tell us they were broken. In January 2026, what was meant to be a landmark moment of public disclosure spiraled into a global panic. A massive data dump containing thousands of pages of documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation was released to the public. It was supposed to be the final word, the definitive account. Instead, it was a digital catastrophe. The cause? A technical failure so simple it was almost unbelievable, a catastrophic copy-paste redaction error. In the rush to publish, a flawed software process failed to properly flatten the documents. The black boxes meant to protect the innocent could simply be copied and pasted away, revealing the text underneath. It was a digital key left in the lock. In an instant, the full names, addresses, and deeply personal details of 43 protected victims and witnesses were accidentally exposed to the entire world. These were individuals who had been promised anonymity, who had bravely come forward, believing the system would shield them. The very mechanism designed for their protection became the instrument of their exposure. The damage was immediate and irreversible. But as shocking as this failure was, our investigation reveals it wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much deeper, more systemic rot. This wasn't the first time the system had failed when it came to Jeffrey Epstein. In fact, it wasn't even the most significant. To find the real story, we have to go back before the headlines, before the sweetheart deals, before the world knew his name. We've uncovered what can only be described as a ghost indictment, a 53-page federal charge sheet, drafted and prepared in May of 2007. This document, buried for nearly 2 decades, is the smoking gun. It proves that federal prosecutors, armed with evidence from a sprawling FBI investigation, were ready. They had compiled a case not just against Epstein, but against 3 of his most crucial inner circle enablers. The indictment meticulously detailed charges of conspiracy, trafficking, and exploitation, painting a picture of a criminal enterprise far more organized than the public was ever led to believe. The world was told there wasn't enough evidence for a federal case, that a local, non-prosecution agreement in Florida was the only viable path. That was the official story. But these files prove that was a lie. The FBI was ready for a trial 20 years ago. They had the witnesses. They had the flight logs. They had the blueprint of the entire operation. So the question that haunts this entire saga isn't just what Epstein did, but how he was allowed to do it. Why was a 53-page federal indictment naming powerful co-conspirators suddenly and silently buried? What happened in the summer of 2007 that caused the full might of the Justice Department to retreat, opting instead for a deal that has been called a national disgrace? The answers lie hidden in a complex web of power, influence, and systematic protection that insulated Epstein for decades. It's a story of deals made in secret, of evidence ignored, and of powerful individuals who worked to keep the truth from ever seeing the light of day. The 2026 redaction failure wasn't just a technical glitch. It was an echo of a much older, more deliberate concealment. To understand the man, you have to understand the blueprint of his protection. And tonight, we're laying that blueprint bare. In the shadowlands of the internet, where secrets are currency, a digital ghost stirred. It was known as the J-Mail archive, not just a collection of emails, but a sprawling 3 million-page ledger of influence, power, and corruption. A complete digital DNA of a criminal enterprise, meticulously backed up, and then, for years, forgotten. This wasn't a leak in the traditional sense. It was a catastrophic failure of data security. A server once housed in the US Virgin Islands and thought to be decommissioned was improperly wiped. For years, it sat dormant, a ticking time bomb connected to the web, its contents a ghost in the machine waiting for a door to open. In early 2026, a consortium of investigative journalists, acting on a tip from a cybersecurity whistleblower, found that door. What they pulled from the digital ether was staggering. Over 7 terabytes of data, Emails, calendar entries, flight manifests, financial transactions, and private notes spanning nearly 2 decades. It was the complete, unredacted history of Jeffrey Epstein's network. The raw data was a chaotic mess, a digital haystack of immense proportions. But within that chaos were needles of damning truth. The process of indexing and making sense of this digital monster took weeks of round-the-clock work, powered by custom-built AI algorithms designed to cross-reference names, dates, and locations. As the data was structured, the first revelations began to emerge, not as coherent narratives, but as raw numbers. The mentioned counts alone painted a chilling picture of proximity and access. The name Leslie Groff, Epstein's longtime executive assistant, appeared over 157,000 times. Her digital footprint was everywhere, a constant presence scheduling calls, arranging travel, and managing the day-to-day operations of the network. The name Donald Trump appeared over 38,000 times, revealing a complex and long-standing association that went far beyond what was publicly known, with mentions scattered across calendars, flight logs, and personal address books from the 1990s through the late 2010s. These numbers weren't proof of guilt, but they were undeniable proof of connection. They were the threads that investigators would begin to pull. But while these names were expected, the biggest shockwave from the Gmail dataquake didn't hit New York or Palm Beach. It struck the heart of the British establishment. The data contained a dedicated folder, cryptically labeled A Envoy. Inside, a trove of communications that drew a direct line to London. For years, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, had served as the United Kingdom's special representative for international trade and investment. His role was to champion British business abroad, opening doors and securing deals. He was, in title and in function, a representative of the Crown. The Gmail archive, however, suggested a deeply troubling dual role. On the morning of February 19, 2026, the unthinkable happened. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested at his home on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The arrest was the culmination of a frantic, behind-the-scenes analysis of the A Envoy files. The documents, which included email forwards and scanned attachments, alleged a stunning betrayal. While serving as a UK trade envoy, the prince was allegedly funneling confidential government briefings, sensitive economic forecasts, and details of international trade negotiations directly to Epstein's desk. The data trail was systematic. The files suggest that as late as 2010, long after Epstein's first conviction in Florida, the flow of information continued. A briefing on a sensitive arms deal in the Middle East, prepared for UK ministers, was allegedly forwarded to Epstein just hours after the prince received it. A confidential summary of a G20 finance meeting outlining the private positions of world leaders appears to have been scanned and emailed from a hotel during an official trip. This wasn't a casual exchange of gossip. The allegations pointed to a methodical transfer of state intelligence. The information would have been priceless to a financier like Epstein, giving him an illicit edge in the markets and an unparalleled insight into the geopolitical landscape. The trade envoy wasn't just working for the crown, he was working for the system. A system of power and information brokered in the shadows, far from the public eye, with a convicted predator at its center. The royal scandal was just the first of many doors the Gmail archive would blow wide open. For years, the Zorro Ranch was a black hole for investigators. A sprawling 7,600-acre fortress of solitude nestled deep in the New Mexico desert. Its sheer scale is difficult to comprehend. A private kingdom larger than many small towns, shielded by miles of unforgiving terrain. This immense size, combined with a labyrinth of private roads and rugged topography, made it a logistical nightmare for law enforcement. During the initial 2019 raids, federal agents were on the property, but sources familiar with the operation, cited in later reports, claimed the search was severely constrained. They were allegedly limited by time, resources, and the warrant's specific scope, which focused primarily on the main residence and a few outbuildings. The vast majority of the acreage, thousands of acres of raw, untamed land, remained virtually untouched, a void in the official investigation. This gap in the search would become a festering wound in the case, fueling years of speculation and doubt. What, if anything, was missed in that vast expanse? The question lingered, unanswered, as the case files gathered dust. That all changed on February 19, 2026. After years of public pressure and the explosive revelations from the Gmail leaks we discussed earlier, the state of New Mexico took an unprecedented step. Frustrated by the perceived inaction at the federal level, state legislators authorized a $2.5 million Truth Commission. This wasn't just another task force. It was a formal, state-sanctioned body with a singular, powerful mandate to finally and comprehensively investigate the claims that had been buried in case files and whispered by sources since 2019. The commission's formation marked a critical turning point, shifting the investigative authority from federal agencies, who had seemingly moved on, to a state body determined to find definitive answers for its citizens. The budget was specifically allocated for advanced forensic technology, expert consultations, and extensive excavation operations. Resources the original search reportedly lacked. The commission's primary targets were twofold, both stemming from tips that had been deemed credible but were never fully pursued. The first was a set of chilling references to subsurface anomalies. These weren't vague rumors. According to documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests, these tips originated from a private intelligence firm that had conducted its own remote analysis of the property years prior. Using satellite imagery and, reportedly, other classified remote sensing techniques, the firm flagged several specific locations across the ranch that showed signs of ground disturbance inconsistent with natural erosion or known ranching activities. These digital ghosts, hidden in proprietary reports, suggested something had been buried and concealed. The Truth Commission was now tasked with bringing in ground-penetrating radar and forensic archaeologists to turn those digital shadows into physical reality, to see what or who lay beneath the desert floor. Even more disturbing was the second, highly specific objective. The commission was ordered to investigate persistent tips, first logged in 2019 and later corroborated by data in the Gmail leaks, that the bodies of at least 2 young foreign girls were buried somewhere on the property. According to a summary in the commission's charter, an informant had provided detailed, though unverified, information about the victims' approximate age and nationality. The original 2019 tip was allegedly dismissed as one of many unsubstantiated leads in a chaotic global investigation. But with the new context provided by the leaked emails and the glaring reality that the ranch was never fully searched, the claim took on a terrifying new weight. The state was no longer willing to let it remain a footnote. The Zorro Ranch Truth Commission was not just digging for evidence, it was digging for bodies, for answers, and for a truth that had been buried for 7 long years. Perhaps the most chilling reveal from the 2026 dump is the white van decoy. On the morning Epstein died, staff at MCC reportedly staged a decoy for cameras while a plain white van moved the real body. That transport still feels off. Timelines, custodians, and chain of custody raise questions. Is there more to the story? Subscribe to our true crime docuseries as we uncover who is on the Epstein files next.